My mother loved only my brother, the golden child. When I moved away from them, I inherited $8 million from my aunt, and my parents began threatening me with a lawsuit. When my mom married Alex, everything I thought I knew about family got turned upside down. I was 14, awkward, and just trying to get through high school. My mom, Sarah, had been a single parent my whole life, and while we weren't rolling in money, she'd always made me feel like I was enough. Then she met Alex. Alex had a son, Brandon, who was 17 at the time. He was the golden child from the moment we stepped into his world. He had that kind of confident, carefree attitude that made him popular with adults, and apparently with my mom, too. From day one, I felt like I was some kind of outsider in my own home. They acted like a ready-made family, with me as an extra that came along with the package. It didn't take long for me to realize my place in this new dynamic. I'd walk into a room, and Mom and Alex would be sitting with Brandon, laughing or watching TV together. But when I joined, things grew tense, almost like I was intruding. If I tried to talk, the vibe shifted immediately. I got one-word answers, or those fake smiles that didn't reach their eyes. One night, I remember coming home late from school. I was on the debate team, and we'd had a late practice. When I walked through the door, Alex was furious, waiting in the kitchen like I'd committed some crime. "Where were you?" he demanded, his voice echoing through the house. I was taken aback. Mom knew I had debate practice, but she was standing behind him, silent. I stammered out the explanation, looking over to her for support. She just looked at me like I was lying. "It's not safe for you to be out that late," Alex said, shaking his head. Brandon had come home way later than me plenty of times, but somehow that didn't matter. He was responsible. I was reckless. After that, things only got worse. Brandon and I shared a bathroom between our rooms, and every time something was out of place, an empty shampoo bottle, a towel on the floor, it was always my fault. Once, Brandon left his dirty laundry all over the bathroom, and Alex stormed into my room, accusing me of being messy and disrespectful. I tried to explain it wasn't me, but he cut me off, saying, "Don't make excuses, Rachel. Just clean up after yourself." Brandon was in his room the whole time, probably hearing the entire thing and laughing. There was this one weekend that really made me question everything. We were supposed to go to the lake, a family outing, as Alex called it. I'd been looking forward to it all week. I wasn't naive enough to think it would fix everything, but I was hoping for at least one good memory with all of us together. But that morning, when I was getting ready, Mom came in and said, "Honey, I think it might be best if you stay home this time. Brandon's been stressed with school, and he just needs some time to relax." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I tried to protest, but she'd already decided. They left without me. I spent the whole day alone in the house, feeling like a ghost in what was supposed to be my own family. When they came back, they didn't even ask me how my day was. They just walked in, laughing and talking about the lake like it was some private memory I wasn't allowed to share. Over the next few months, it became clear that I wasn't just an outsider. I was the scapegoat. Every minor issue was somehow my fault. If Brandon got a bad grade, it was because I'd distracted him with my attitude. If something went missing, I was careless and irresponsible. I once overheard Alex telling my mom, "Rachel's going to end up a problem if we don't put her in line." My own mom just nodded like he was right. Then, one afternoon, Brandon and I had our first real confrontation. He was in my room, rummaging through my things like he owned the place. I walked in and asked him what he was doing. He just shrugged, pulling out a necklace my dad had given me years ago. "What's this?" he sneered, holding it up. "That's mine," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. But he just laughed and dangled it in front of me, making a game out of it. I reached out to grab it, and he yanked it back, still laughing. I was fuming. We started shouting at each other, and my mom and Alex came running. But instead of asking what happened, they immediately turned on me. "Why are you always causing problems?" Alex snapped. "Mom, he was in my room." I protested. "He was going through my stuff." But she didn't listen. "Rachel, can you stop being so difficult? Brandon's just trying to get along with you." That night, I sat in my room, replaying the whole situation in my head. It didn't matter what I said or did. I could never win. To them, I was the problem, no matter how hard I tried. It wasn't long after Mom and Alex got married that things went from bad to worse. Every day felt like a battle, where no matter what happened, I was the one left with the blame. Brandon's behavior only added fuel to the fire. He was messy, disruptive, and seemed to make it his mission to push every possible boundary in the house. But it was like nobody else saw it but me. One night, Brandon threw a party in the basement while Alex and Mom were out. I kept to my room, trying to drown out the music and the noise of his friends stomping around the house. They left trash everywhere, empty soda cans, snack wrappers, you name it. I didn't touch any of it, figuring Brandon would clean up his own mess. But the next morning, Alex barged into my room, furious. "Rachel, this place is a disaster," he yelled, waking me up. "How could you be so irresponsible?" I tried to explain that it wasn't me, that I hadn't even gone downstairs, but he didn't want to hear it. "It's everyone's responsibility to keep this house clean," he said. "I don't care if Brandon made the mess. You're part of this family too, and you need to help clean up." He walked out before I could even respond. Later that year, Mom announced that she was pregnant. I thought maybe, just maybe, things would change. Maybe a new baby would make her feel like we were all a family. But as her pregnancy progressed, the house began to change, and I started to feel like more of an outsider than ever. Then, one afternoon, Mom dropped a bombshell. She came into my room with Alex and said, "Rachel, we need to talk. Since the baby will be here soon, we're thinking it would be best if you moved into the guest room." I was stunned. "Move? This is my room. Where am I supposed to go?" "The guest room," Alex replied as if it were the simplest thing in the world. "We'll turn this room into the nursery for the baby. It's just better this way." But I've been here my whole life," I stammered, unable to hide my shock. I looked at Mom, hoping she'd see how much this was hurting me, but she just gave me that same blank, indifferent look she always did now. "It's just a room, Rachel," she said softly. "You'll be fine in the guest room. Besides, it's only fair. We need to make space for the new baby, don't we?" That weekend, Alex and Brandon moved my things into the guest room. It was tiny compared to my old room, barely big enough to fit my bed and desk. I stood there, staring at the plain, cold walls, feeling like I was a guest in my own house. All of my posters, my books, my personal things, they were now shoved into this tiny room that had none of the warmth or familiarity of my old space. I didn't even have my own closet anymore. They left most of my clothes in the hallway closet because there wasn't enough room in here. As the weeks went on, my old room was transformed into the nursery. I'd walk by and see Mom and Alex painting the walls, setting up a crib, picking out baby clothes, all while I sat alone in my cramped space, forgotten. Brandon seemed to take full advantage of my isolation. With Mom's attention focused on the baby and Alex wrapped up in helping her, he got away with everything. Once, I found him in the guest room, digging through my things. "What are you doing?" I demanded, feeling a surge of anger. "Relax, I'm just looking for a charger," he said, not even glancing up. He kept rifling through my drawers, and when he finally found what he wanted, he smirked and walked out like he owned the place. I told Mom and Alex about it, hoping they'd finally see how disrespectful he was, but they just shrugged it off. "It's just a charger, Rachel," Mom said, exasperated. "Why do you always make such a big deal out of everything?" A few weeks later, Adam was born, my new baby brother. Everyone was over the moon, and for a brief moment, I thought things might change. Holding him for the first time, I felt a spark of hope, a belief that maybe he could bring us all together. But that hope was quickly snuffed out. From the moment he was born, Adam became the center of Mom's world. She'd spend hours with him, doting on him, singing to him, talking about how he was the miracle our family had been waiting for. I tried to be involved, offering to help with feeding or changing diapers, but she always brushed me off. "Adam's just too little for you to handle," she'd say. Or, "I need to be the one to do it. You'll understand when you're older." It was like she didn't trust me with him, like I was somehow a threat to this perfect little family she'd created. As Adam grew, Brandon only got worse. He'd leave his dirty clothes in the hallway, dishes piled up in his room, and food wrappers strewn around the house. Every time Alex or Mom found a mess, I was the one who got the blame. "Rachel, why can't you clean up after yourself?" Alex would scold. But it's not me. It's Brandon. I'd protest, but my words always fell on deaf ears. It doesn't matter who did it, he'd say. You live here, too, so take responsibility. One day, I found Brandon's friends lounging around the house while he was blasting music in the living room. They'd eaten half the snacks in the kitchen, leaving wrappers everywhere. I tried to clean up after them, not wanting to get blamed again, but as soon as Alex walked in and saw me picking up, he shook his head. Rachel, I'm disappointed. You know we don't leave messes like this. I opened my mouth to explain, but he cut me off. No excuses, young lady. You need to start respecting this house. I was livid. The unfairness of it all was suffocating. I stormed off to my tiny room, slamming the door behind me. I sat on my bed, clutching my pillow, feeling like I was trapped in some kind of nightmare. I wanted to scream, to cry, to do something that would make them see me, hear me, understand that I wasn't the problem. As the months went by, I tried to keep my head down, hoping that things would get better, but they only got worse. One evening, I accidentally knocked over a vase while reaching for a book in the living room. It shattered on the floor, and before I could even react, Alex was there, glaring at me. What's wrong with you, Rachel? He snapped. Why can't you be more careful? Brandon was sitting on the couch, smirking. I could feel his gaze on me, reveling in my humiliation. I wanted to yell, to tell them it wasn't fair, but I knew it wouldn't make a difference. I cleaned up the broken vase, all while Alex and Mom watched, shaking their heads. That night, I lay in my cramped room, staring at the ceiling, feeling more alone than ever. It was clear that I didn't belong here. Not in this house, not in this family. I was just an inconvenience, a reminder of the life Mom had left behind. And as much as it hurt, I knew that no amount of hoping would change that. It was around my junior year of high school that I started to realize if I was going to survive, I'd have to spend as little time at home as possible. Living under Mom, Alex, and Brandon's constant scrutiny had worn me down, and every day felt like a tightrope walk between triggering their disapproval or going unnoticed. So, I threw myself into everything outside of the house. Work, friends, studying, anything to be somewhere else. My first escape came when I landed a job at a local coffee shop. It was run by a kind woman named Denise, a former teacher with a warm smile and endless patience. Denise treated me with a level of respect I hadn't felt in years, and I clung to that job like a lifeline. I started off working just weekends, but soon I'd added as many shifts as I could get away with. Denise noticed I was always eager to take extra hours, and one day, while we were closing up, she asked me about it. Rachel, you've been taking on a lot, she said, gently but with that observant tone that only teachers have. Are you okay? For a second, I thought about opening up, telling her everything, but the words felt heavy, tangled in years of silence. I just nodded. Yeah, just saving up for college, I lied, but she didn't push. Working at the coffee shop introduced me to other people my age who felt like more than just friends. They became my escape, my temporary family. I grew close to a girl named Emma, a regular who came in every morning for a caramel latte before school. Emma was bubbly, funny, and kind in a way that made her seem like the opposite of everyone I'd grown up with. She listened without judgment and didn't just see me as Rachel with the messed-up home life. Over time, she became my confidant, the person I'd vent to about all the things I'd kept bottled up. One afternoon, while we sat on the coffee shop's patio during my break, I finally spilled about Brandon and the endless battles at home. Emma listened, her face shifting from shock to sympathy as I laid out the constant accusations, the blame, and the feeling of being invisible. Rach, that's insane, she said, looking horrified. Why don't you tell your mom how you feel? I gave a bitter laugh. Because she wouldn't care. Or worse, she'd just turn it back on me like it's my fault. I took a shaky breath, finally putting into words the thing I'd always known deep down. It's like I'm not even part of the family anymore. I'm just there. Emma reached across the table and squeezed my hand. That's not okay, Rachel. You deserve better than that. For the first time, someone had said it out loud. I deserved better. The thought had never even crossed my mind. Emma's support became a new foundation for me, and the more I confided in her, the more I saw just how toxic my home environment had become. Things at home didn't improve. If anything, they got worse. Brandon's behavior was escalating. He'd started skipping classes, throwing parties even when Mom and Alex were home, and treating the house like his personal playground. I knew he was doing it to get under my skin, and the more I stayed away, the more he tried to make me miserable when I was home. But even with his increasingly disruptive behavior, I was still the one who got blamed. If anything went wrong, Alex and Mom would look at me with the same disappointed expression, as if I was somehow responsible for Brandon's behavior. One night, after a particularly rough shift, I came home to find that someone had rummaged through my things in the guest room. My laptop was left open, papers were scattered across the bed, and my clothes were thrown around like someone had gone through every drawer. Brandon was nowhere to be found, but I knew it had to be him. I marched to the living room, where Mom was sitting with Adam, and demanded an explanation. "Brandon was just looking for something," she said casually, not even looking up. "There's no need to get dramatic about it." "Dramatic? He went through my personal stuff, Mom." I felt my voice rise, the frustration bubbling over. "Rachel, you're being unreasonable," she replied coldly. "If you weren't so secretive all the time, maybe this wouldn't happen." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My own mother was standing up for him, again, like it was normal for him to invade my privacy. It was one of those moments where the last bit of hope I'd held onto shattered completely. After that, I made it my mission to start saving up even harder. I took on more hours at the coffee shop, skipped most school dances, and turned down invites to hang out if it meant saving more money. I opened up to Denise one night, finally admitting why I was working so much. I need to get out of that house," I told her quietly as we wiped down tables after closing. She looked at me, her expression soft with understanding. "I figured as much," she said, putting a hand on my shoulder. "If you ever need anything, help with school, or even just a place to crash, you let me know, okay?" Her kindness nearly brought me to tears, and for the first time, I felt a real sense of hope. I started researching what I'd need to move out. Emma helped me look up affordable apartments, and we even went to a few open houses together, dreaming about freedom. But Alex and Mom started noticing my absence, and they didn't like it. One night, Alex confronted me when I got home from work. He asked why I was always gone, why I didn't try harder to be part of the family. His words were dripping with blame, like I was the one breaking things apart. "Rachel, you've been distant. This isn't healthy for any of us," he said, as if he'd suddenly decided to play the concerned parent. "If you're going to be part of this family, you need to put in the effort." I couldn't help but laugh, a bitter sound I hadn't meant to let out. "Part of the family?" I repeated. "When have any of you ever treated me like family?" Mom looked at me, her face tight with anger. "Rachel, don't talk to your father like that." "He's not my father," I replied, the words slipping out before I could stop them. I'd never said it out loud before, but it felt like a release. After that, things were tense. They monitored me more closely, limiting how often I could leave the house. They even started questioning who I was spending time with, demanding I spend more time with the family. It was suffocating, and it only fueled my determination to leave. Finally, by the end of my senior year, I had enough saved up. Emma and I found a small apartment not far from the coffee shop, and I signed the lease. I didn't tell anyone at home until the day I was ready to move out. I waited until Mom and Alex were both in the living room, then calmly announced my plan. "I'm moving out," I said, keeping my voice steady. Mom looked at me, stunned, while Alex just shook his head. "You're being ridiculous, Rachel," he scoffed. "Where will you even go?" "I found an apartment," I replied simply. "I'm leaving tonight." They tried to talk me out of it, Mom saying I was too young to be on my own, and Alex claiming I was making a huge mistake. But for the first time, I felt completely sure of myself. I packed my things, loaded them into Emma's car, and left without looking back. As we drove away, I felt a mix of fear and exhilaration. I had no idea what the future held, but for the first time in years, I felt free. It had been a few years since I'd moved out and started to build my life outside the shadow of Mom, Alex, and Brandon. Living on my own, I'd started to feel stronger and more capable, even happy. I'd gone to college, built a career, and was making new friends. For the first time, I felt like I was in control of my own life, far removed from the toxic dynamics of my past. I still saw Mom occasionally, out of some lingering sense of duty, but every visit reminded me why I'd left. There was no warmth, no real connection, just a strained, distant politeness. Then, one evening, I got a call from Mom. Her voice sounded tight, strained, in a way I hadn't heard before. "Rachel," she began, I thought you should know. Alex had a seizure. He's in the hospital." A cold feeling washed over me. Despite everything, the thought of Alex being seriously ill stirred something in me. I knew our relationship had never been warm or fatherly, but hearing he was in the hospital triggered a mix of worry, confusion, and some deep-rooted loyalty I couldn't entirely shake. "Is he okay?" I asked cautiously. "They're running tests. We'll know more soon," she replied, her voice barely a whisper. I felt a pang of sympathy, thinking of how scared she must be. I decided to visit Alex in the hospital, more out of respect than affection. When I arrived, the tension in the air was palpable. Brandon was already there, standing beside Mom, who looked drained and exhausted. The sight of them together felt strangely familiar, like I was walking back into my childhood. A scene where they all stood together and I stood apart. Alex looked fragile, pale against the hospital sheets, and for a moment, I felt a wave of pity. Whatever our history, this was a man facing his own mortality. Brandon barely acknowledged me, and when he did, it was with a curt nod. I stood off to the side, feeling like an outsider all over again. As I listened to the doctors explain his condition, I learned that Alex had been diagnosed with a condition that left his health in an uncertain balance. Mom clung to Brandon and seemed to lean on him for support in a way she'd never done with me. I didn't expect anything else at this point, but seeing it felt like salt in an old wound. Over the next few days, Mom began hinting about Alex's concerns with his affairs. He'd started talking about setting things in order for the future. The way she said it felt ominous. Then one day, she came over to talk to me directly. "Rachel," she began cautiously, as if treading on thin ice. "Alex has been working on his will. He wants to make sure everything's settled for Brandon and Adam, in case anything happens." I blinked, trying to process her words. "And me?" I asked, the question slipping out before I could stop it. I knew the answer before she even said it. "Well, Rachel, you're doing well on your own, aren't you? You have your job, your apartment." She trailed off, searching for words that wouldn't hurt as much as the truth. "So he's not leaving anything for me." I finished for her, my voice quiet but steady. Mom's silence said it all. The final nail in the coffin. This was the confirmation of every suspicion I'd ever had about my place in their family, or rather, my lack of one. Alex had raised Brandon and Adam as his own, and I was left on the sidelines, someone to be tolerated but not truly embraced. And now, even in his final arrangements, I was to be erased, as if I'd never been a part of his life at all. It felt like a punch to the gut. I'd fought for so long to be seen, to be accepted, and even when I left, some small part of me must have hoped they'd miss me, want me to come back. But now I understood. I was just a ghost to them, a passing figure in the background. In the days that followed, I wrestled with a mess of emotions: anger, grief, and a strange, hollow relief. In a way, it was liberating, knowing, finally, where I stood with them. No more questioning, no more hope for reconciliation. They had made their choice, and now I was free to make mine. As Alex's health stabilized, the will was finalized, and I was excluded entirely. Brandon and Adam were the sole heirs to everything. Assets, properties, even the sentimental items that had belonged to Mom from before she met Alex. They'd effectively erased my place in the family. I took it as a sign to close that chapter of my life for good. It was months after Alex's will was finalized and my place in that chapter of my life was fully closed. I'd moved on, throwing myself into work and a few close friendships. I'd long given up on expecting anything from family, so when I got a call from a lawyer named Mr. Larkin, telling me that he represented the estate of my great-aunt Ellen, I was shocked. Aunt Ellen was a distant figure I barely remembered. She was Mom's aunt, an eccentric woman who lived somewhere on the East Coast. My only memories of her were vague stories I'd overheard as a child, and maybe one or two Christmas cards when I was very young. Miss Rachel, Mr. Larkin began over the phone in a careful, professional tone. I'm reaching out to inform you that your great-aunt Ellen has recently passed away and named you as the primary beneficiary of her estate. It took a moment for the words to sink in. Wait, I'm sorry, I stammered. But why would she? I barely even knew her. Mr. Larkin let out a small, understanding chuckle. I understand that this is unusual, but Miss Ellen apparently held you in high regard. She left very specific instructions that everything be transferred to you. Everything? Yes, he confirmed. The estate includes real estate properties, some securities, and an established trust fund. I would suggest we meet to discuss the full details in person. It's well substantial. When I met with Mr. Larkin, I learned just how substantial he meant. Aunt Ellen had left me a trust fund worth $8 million, alongside a portfolio of investments and a house on the coast of Maine. The figures were so staggering I could barely comprehend them, my mind spinning as he listed the assets and walked me through the documents. My life had gone from barely scraping by to one where money would never be a concern again. It felt surreal, like I'd stepped into someone else's life. Your great-aunt was very private, Mr. Larkin explained. She led a quiet life, invested wisely, and kept to herself. She seemed to prefer it that way, but in her will, she expressed a strong desire that her estate go to you. I couldn't believe it. I sat there, stunned, gripping the arms of my chair. Part of me felt overwhelmed with gratitude. Another part of me felt a strange sadness. Ellen had been family, my family, and yet I barely knew her. Now, thanks to her, I had the freedom and security I'd always dreamed of, the kind of independence that would have seemed impossible before. And with it came a profound sense of peace. It didn't take long for word of my inheritance to spread through the family grapevine. I'm not even sure how they found out. Maybe one of Mom's distant cousins had caught wind of it. Or perhaps Mom herself heard through some obscure family channel. But soon enough, my phone was buzzing with messages, and it felt like the entire family had resurfaced, drawn by the scent of money. The first call came from Mom. I could almost feel her unease through the phone, masked by an uncharacteristically sugary tone. Rachel, sweetheart, how have you been? She asked, her voice overly cheerful. I'm fine, Mom, I replied, already wary. I hadn't heard from her in weeks, and now, out of the blue, here she was, acting as if she cared. Listen, she continued, drawing out her words. I heard you. Came into a bit of luck recently. Bit of luck was quite the understatement. But I stayed silent, letting her talk, wanting to see where she was going with this. Now, Rachel, you know how hard it's been for the family lately, she said, her tone shifting to something softer, almost pleading. With Alex's health and all the expenses we've had, it's just, well, it's been tough. I took a deep breath, feeling a wave of anger rise in me. Here she was, reaching out not because she cared about me, but because I had something she wanted. What are you asking, Mom? I said, keeping my voice as steady as I could. She hesitated, but only for a moment. I just thought, given everything, that you might want to help us out a bit. You know, for family's sake. I couldn't believe the nerve. This was the same woman who'd stood by while Alex and Brandon made my life miserable, who had done nothing to protect me when I was blamed and excluded. And now, just because I had money, she was calling to ask me to help out? Mom, I replied, struggling to keep my voice even. Where was this concern for family when I needed it? When I was struggling just to feel like I belonged? You think I owe you something just because we share blood? There was a long silence on the other end. I could tell she hadn't expected me to push back. Finally, she spoke, her tone harder this time. Rachel, I'm your mother. I raised you, didn't I? And now you're just going to turn your back on us? Mom, you turned your back on me years ago, I said, feeling a strange sense of finality. I don't owe you anything. I ended the call, hands shaking with a mix of anger and sadness. But that wasn't the end of it. The next day, I got a call from Alex. I nearly ignored it, but curiosity got the better of me. I picked up, bracing myself for what I knew would be a tough conversation. Rachel, he began, his voice gruff, but with an edge of forced warmth. I heard about the inheritance. That's quite a windfall you've got there. Yeah, it is, I replied flatly, waiting for him to get to the point. Look, he continued, his tone shifting to something almost fatherly, a tone I'd never heard him use before. We've had our differences, but I want you to know that I'm proud of you. You've done well for yourself. I couldn't help but laugh. The hypocrisy was almost laughable. Alex, cut to the chase. Why are you calling? He hesitated, then finally came out with it. Brandon and Adam, they could really use some help getting started. Brandon's been struggling with his business, and Adam, well, he deserves a good education. It would mean a lot if you could help them out. We're family, after all. Family. The word tasted bitter in my mouth. This was the same man who had excluded me from his own will, who had treated me like a nuisance instead of a daughter. And now he wanted me to fund Brandon's latest venture and pay for Adam's college? No, Alex, I replied, keeping my voice steady. I won't be doing that. There was a pause, and then his tone turned cold, almost threatening. You really think you can just turn your back on us? After everything we've done for you? Everything you've done for me? I repeated, disbelief coloring my words. You've done nothing for me, Alex. If anything, you've done everything to push me away. I don't owe you a thing. I hung up, heart pounding, but I knew it wouldn't end there. And I was right. Over the next few days, I started getting messages from Brandon. He, of course, took a different approach. His texts were full of thinly veiled insults and guilt-tripping. So you're rich now, huh? One text read, guess all that money went to your head. Too good for your own family? When I didn't respond, he tried another angle. Adam deserves better than this. He's your brother, Rachel. Don't you want to help him? I ignored him, refusing to be drawn into his manipulation. But it wasn't long before he started showing up in person. One evening, I came home from work to find him standing outside my apartment building, leaning casually against the wall as if he belonged there. Brandon, what are you doing here? I asked, feeling a surge of irritation. He shrugged, smirking in that arrogant way he'd perfected over the years. Thought we should talk. Family to family. We have nothing to talk about, I replied, moving to unlock the door. But he stepped in front of me, blocking my path. Come on, Rachel. Don't be like that. You've got all this money now, and you're just going to let your family struggle? I felt a surge of anger. My family? Since when did any of you ever treat me like family? All you did was make my life miserable, Brandon. You don't get to show up now and act like you care. He laughed, a harsh, mocking sound. Please, don't act like you're better than us just because you got lucky. Lucky? I repeated, my voice rising. This isn't luck, Brandon. This is the one good thing I've ever gotten, and you don't get to take it from me. He sneered, but finally stepped aside. You're making a mistake, Rachel. Don't think we'll forget this. I brushed past him, refusing to give him the satisfaction of a response. But even as I climbed the stairs to my apartment, his words echoed in my mind. Part of me knew he wouldn't let this go. And sure enough, the harassment continued. I started getting letters in the mail, messages from Mom, Brandon, even a few from distant relatives I barely knew. They all had the same theme: guilt, manipulation, and entitlement. I felt like I was drowning in their demands, their accusations, as if they'd forgotten everything they'd done, and now believed they had a right to the one thing in my life that was truly mine. Finally, I decided I'd had enough. I called Mr. Larkin, the lawyer who had handled Aunt Ellen's estate, and explained the situation. He listened patiently, his calm voice a balm to my frayed nerves. Rachel, he said gently, you have every legal right to refuse them. Your great-aunt left this inheritance to you and you alone. If they continue to harass you, we can take legal action. Hearing those words was like a weight lifting off my shoulders. I'd spent so much of my life feeling like I had to give in, to appease them, but now I realized that I didn't owe them anything. Aunt Ellen had given me a gift, a chance to start fresh, free from the toxicity of my past, and I wasn't going to let anyone take that away from me. Over the next few weeks, I began to rebuild my boundaries. I blocked Brandon's number, ignored Mom's calls, and filed away the letters without a second thought. For the first time, I felt a sense of peace, a certainty that I was doing the right thing. The harassment eventually died down, replaced by a cold, resentful silence. I knew they wouldn't forgive me, that in their eyes, I was the villain for not sharing my good fortune. But I'd made my peace with that. They had chosen to exclude me, to treat me as an outsider, and now they were facing the consequences of their actions. Aunt Ellen's inheritance had given me more than just financial freedom. It had given me the strength to stand up for myself, to say no to the people who had hurt me, and to finally let go of the family that had never truly been mine. Just when I thought things had finally settled, another blow came my way. I received a letter in the mail, a legal document, thick and heavy, that turned out to be a formal notice of a lawsuit. My own mother, Sarah, was suing me, demanding a share of my inheritance from Aunt Ellen. I sat in my kitchen, staring at the paperwork, unable to believe what I was seeing. It was a new low, even for her. The lawsuit was absurd. Sarah claimed that, as my mother, she was entitled to a fair share of my inheritance since she'd raised and provided for me all those years. Reading those words felt like a slap to the face, each line twisting the knife of betrayal a little deeper. Here was the same woman who had neglected me, sided with Alex and Brandon against me, and treated me as less than family. And now she thought she deserved the one gift I'd received in my life without her interference. I called Mr. Larkin, my lawyer, who handled my case with a calm efficiency that was a balm to my frayed nerves. He reassured me right away. Rachel, these claims are baseless. She has no legal grounds to demand anything from your inheritance. It was left to you specifically, with no conditions. We'll respond to this quickly and shut it down. The relief I felt was mixed with anger. My own mother was dragging me through a lawsuit, forcing me to spend time and energy defending something that was rightfully mine. But Mr. Larkin was as good as his word. Within a few weeks, the case was dismissed. The judge's ruling was clear. Sarah had no claim to my inheritance, and her attempts to pressure me into giving her money were groundless. The dismissal of the case brought a sense of relief, but I was left drained. The lawsuit, the harassment, the constant pressure from my so-called family, it had all taken a toll on me. I needed a break, something to get away from the weight of it all. So, when my friend Emma suggested a trip, I didn't hesitate to say yes. Emma, along with two other close friends, Ben and Carly, had been my lifeline during all of this. They'd stood by me, offering support and reminding me that not everyone was out to take advantage of me. We planned a week-long getaway to a quiet beach town, a place far enough from everything that I could let go of the stress that had been hanging over me. As soon as we arrived, I felt the tension start to melt away. The sound of the ocean, the smell of salt in the air, and the simple pleasure of being with people who cared about me for who I was. It all began to heal something inside me. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of peace. One evening, as we sat around a bonfire on the beach, Carly brought up the topic of family. You know, sometimes family isn't the people you're born with, she said, staring into the flames. It's the people who choose to be there for you. Her words struck a chord. I'd spent so much of my life trying to find a place in a family that had never truly accepted me. But here, with Emma, Ben, and Carly, I felt more understood and valued than I ever had with my biological family. The trip became a turning point for me. I started to realize that I didn't need to keep looking for love and acceptance from people who had proven, time and again, that they would only take and never give. I had people in my life who valued me, not because of money or obligation, but because of who I was. When we returned from the trip, I decided to focus on building connections with people who truly cared about me. I started volunteering at a local shelter, working with kids who had been through tough times. Being able to offer support and stability to them gave me a sense of purpose that I hadn't felt in a long time. Through my volunteer work, I met a woman named Lisa, who ran the shelter. She was warm, empathetic, and had a quiet strength that I admired. Lisa became something of a mentor to me, guiding me through the challenges of working with kids who had been through trauma and teaching me the value of compassion and resilience. One afternoon, as we were cleaning up after an event at the shelter, Lisa pulled me aside. "Rachel, I just want you to know how much of a difference you're making here," she said. "These kids see you as someone they can trust, someone who believes in them. That's not something everyone can do." Her words moved me deeply. For so long, I'd felt like I didn't belong anywhere, that I was just drifting through life without a purpose. But here, at the shelter, I felt like I was finally part of something meaningful. I was giving these kids something I'd never had growing up, a sense of stability and kindness without strings attached. In the months that followed, I began to invest more in the relationships that brought me joy and fulfillment. I grew closer to my friends, Emma, Ben, and Carly, who had become my chosen family. They were there for me through every setback and every triumph, reminding me that I was valued and loved for who I was, not for what I could give them. Gradually, I felt my own sense of self-worth growing stronger. I started going to therapy, working through the lingering effects of my childhood, and learning to let go of the guilt and resentment that had weighed me down for so long. My therapist helped me understand that I didn't have to hold on to the people who hurt me just because they were family. I had the right to protect my own peace and to surround myself with people who brought positivity into my life.